Continuing with dress selection and design. So we have reached the section of proportion and scale. Proportion, also known as spacing, is the arrangement of forms and shapes in space, and refers thus to the relations of the parts to each other and to the whole composition. Every design should be composed of shapes and spaces, related without too great of difference or too much similarity. No shape should be so dominant that all others are insignificant. No background space should be greatly ignored. Good proportion, for example, requires a fine relationship of a shoulder yoke to the shoulder section of a blouse. So the shoulder yoke is up here. The section in the lower section would be down here. So, or of a peplum to the lower section of a skirt. It includes adjusting the size and shape of the yoke to peplum and of a lower blouse section to lower skirt section. Good proportion also depends that a yoke and a peplum vary in depth. Let's see. So it says if they are equal, neither will dominate. They must vary, and but they should not be extremely different in size. A very shallow shoulder yoke and very long tunic are so different that they appear absurdly out of proportion. The natural order is a shoulder yoke somewhat shallower than a peplum. The yoke is over down here. Let's see. So the yoke should be narrower. The blouse. Let's see. Okay, the natural order is the shoulder yoke narrower than the peplum, since the yoke is related to the blouse and the peplum to the skirt. Never allow a yoke to break a blouse or a peplum to cut across the skirt exactly at a center. The eye forever seeks an orderly arrangement of spaces with variety yet similarity. Let your eye decide how much alike yet how varied the spaces should be, and resort to a mathematical formula only to avoid exact equality. Okay. So scale also has to do with proportion, more significantly in the sense of relation to figure size. Scaling the design to a person's size means cutting down or increasing the size of all shapes and details. Scaling design to figure size will be treated later. Rhythm, measured movement. The term rhythm refers to beat in music, to the controlled movements of dance, to the measured cadence of poetry, and in the spatial arts, to the measure or control of line movements, so the form predominates in a single design. Thus, fluid form prevails when transitional curves or radiating oblique lines produce the dominant harmony, staccato rhythm, when opposing shapes and spaces are harmoniously repeated. Rhythm is altogether lacking when the forms are so confused that no one form is clearly evident. Fluid rhythm. Classic Greek and Roman draperies, Indian saris, and Japanese costumes, which we just saw, all have one rhythm in common, the harmony of related curves and folds that lead the eye effortlessly throughout the entire costume. An Indian sari, for example, is entirely uncut. Every time it is worn, several yards of gauzy fabric are swiftly and skillfully draped around the body. Inspired by such sources, designers create beautiful gowns that flow with the body's motions and appear to be almost uncut. Such fluid gowns, usually intended for late day or formal evening occasions, are so flattering to slender figures that they're seldom out of fashion. Staccato rhythm or varied repetition. Line movement derived from repetitions of structural shapes has abrupt staccato rhythm if the repeated lines are neither too scattered nor too exactly duplicated. But an empty, neglected silhouette or one with many exactly repeated details lacks rhythm entirely and appears monotonously static. For example, evenly spaced and repeated rows of text running around a tubular dress from neck to hem lacks motion. The silhouette varies little, and the text spacing not at all. The repeats are almost as monotonous as railroad ties. Grouping text so that the spaces between them vary is one way of enlivening movement. Changing the shape of a skirt from tubular to triangular is another. Graduating text from small to large as they progress downward is a third arrangement that never fails to create rhythm. Structural seaming, which harmonizes with but does not exactly repeat the contour, and decoration, which reinforces the design theme, also illustrates rhythm through repetition. So rhythm is basically some sort of pattern, but they don't want too much of repetition that is boring and monotonous. So it's good to have a little bit of variety and some sort of interesting things going on with the lines. So we already saw the sari and the Greek gown and the Japanese gown. So the kimono, they're showing how fluid the draping is, not very boxy or structured. They're just draped and the fabric's not cut. It's whole. So fluid figures, fluid lines are always good in dress. Oh, yeah. That's one dress, a modern dress. That's the kimono, the Greek drapery, classic Greek, Indian sari. Rhythm through varied repetition. A monotonous repetition of evenly spaced text lacks motion, but alternating the groups of text and plain spaces varies the movement. Triangular silhouette is also a good variation, and graduating the spaces creates rhythmical movement. So, like, that's very repetitious. If you want to have a little more variety, you would alter the spaces more. Balance, symmetry, and asymmetry. Symmetry in formal balance. Formal or absolute balance or symmetry requires exact equality of left and right halves, as well as the more subtle balance of the unequal upper and lower sections of a costume. A dress fastened and exactly down the center front, with all seams and details of the right half exactly duplicated in reverse on the left, is obviously symmetrical. The balanced right and left halves do not ensure the balance of upper and lower sections. So during the 40s, skirts were short, shoulders exaggerated, wide, and square, and suit jackets unusually long. After the fashion passed, its most ardent adherents admitted it was top-heavy. Heavily padded shoulders had dwarfed hips, and short skirts had failed to add enough weight below the waist to counterbalance wide shoulders. Fashionable look often blinds us to beautiful symmetry because we become accustomed to it. Adhering to natural figure proportions to no padding or puffing always results in clothes that appear symmetrical after the fashion has passed. Attempts frequently are made to relieve the two-set appearance of absolute balance by adding a detail or an ornament to one side. However, the maneuver is seldom successful. Balance must be built into a structure. It cannot be achieved by attaching something to the surface after design has been completed. For example, an absolutely symmetrical dress is unbalanced by the addition of a large patch pocket to one side only. Asymmetrical or informal balance. To balance a design informally or asymmetrically, the right and left halves although different in size and shape, must appear to be the same. Okay, so some stuff that we went through is, this is the top-heavy silhouette of the 40s, showing a big, wider shoulders compared to a skinny skirt. This is an interesting suit dress with double-breasted jacket, but there's some variety in there, so it's interesting. Let's see. It's more asymmetrical in the skirt. It's not. It's informal balance. Okay. So we need to get a feeling of balance. The asymmetrical form easiest to control is illustrated by the double-breasted jacket or coat dress. Right and left halves are exactly alike, but the right half laps as far over the left as the left extends under the right. The sole problem of balance is to establish the lap line far enough from center so that it appears neither just off-center nor too close to the side. Let your eye determine the position which is in balance. True asymmetry is far more complicated. Various parts of a design, although shaped differently and cut separately, must be assembled so the balance is settled. An asymmetrical design should convey an impression of spontaneity. This requires planning, experience, and talent. Oblique folds fanning out in opposite directions counterbalance each other. And that's the bow at the hip weighs the narrow side. Emphasis, subordination, and dominance. Every successful design contains many points of interest subordinated to one major theme. When several points vie for attention and no clear plan is dominant, a design appears confused. One form of rhythm almost always must be emphasized to establish one dominant interest. A well-planned costume should focus attention on the person, not on the splendor of her gown or jewelry. So it says you should focus on some major points and not have a lot of competing points of interest. So in this dress you have a heavy sash which dominates the dress, the look of the dress. Both of these dresses do. One is more skinny and the other is more formal and dressy and flowy. But they have a center sash and a dominant belt. This one is kind of asymmetrical with oblique lines in the skirt, folds, and the bow balances it out. And there's strong vertical fold lines in the skirt as well. Pretty nice dress. And this has more texture, which is emphasized, and a few dominant shapes up in the top region of the dress. It's pretty nice too. So it's you're noting that you should focus on the dress's main points of focus or drawing of attention, the lines and points that dominate. So, leading the eye smoothly throughout a design to concentrate attention on face requires skillful repetition of shapes or flow lines. If lines and shapes alone do not accomplish this with enough force, contrast of color or texture may be tried. For example, if the lines of a black dress are so subtle that they are difficult to follow, they may be reinforced by a light color, a contrast of texture, or compelling piece of jewelry placed to emphasize a dominant shape. The principle of one dominant interest demands that texture and color emphasize lines or forms already planned, not new shapes of their own, which may vie with the structure for dominance. A dress may also hold too much attention at the waistline or hem. For example, an important band of color at the waistline stops the flow of motion and centers attention solely on itself, unless lines lead upward to the shoulders and downward to the hem. In any attempt to single out one of the four principles of composition, isolated and fulfill its requirements without meeting the demands of all the others, is clearly futile. You cannot, for example, subordinate all minor interests to one main theme without stressing one kind of rhythm only. Neither can you have a rhythmical design without maintaining a sense of balance. A feeling of balance will be missing unless the requirement of good spacing are fulfilled. Like the house that Jack built, one principle depends upon another, and to be harmonious, every design must fulfill them all. In conclusion, a word of caution: creative designing requires much more than an understanding of principles, important as that is. Without feeling, spirit, and inventiveness, a design is stiff and lifeless. Yet only by applying principles to all designs after their creation can a strong sense of judgment be developed that will lead to a better designing and to definite improvement of taste in selecting clothing. Some reading references: The Art of Color and Design, and also Morton's The Art of Costume and Personal Appearance. So the four principles we learned about earlier is 1. Proportion and scale, 2. Rhythm or measure of movement, 3. Balance or symmetry and asymmetry, and 4. Emphasis or dominance and subordination. Those are the components of composition. So, proportion and scale, rhythm, measure of movement, balance, symmetry or asymmetry, and emphasis, dominance, and subordination. So experiment. Click designs from current fashion magazines that fulfill the design principles. Mount and analyze them in writing. Click designs that fail to fulfill design principles, that are proportioned badly, lack balance, rhythm, or have more than one major interest. On tracing paper placed over these designs, experiment with changes that eliminate superfluous detail, add needed stretch or seaming, and improve lines or shapes. I'm sure. I can even do that to some of the drawings in this book. some of these dresses need some help. Big time. As well as some of the women whose hair is atrocious. Like, look at this lady. I mean, that's like a guy haircut. You know? Design your own. Judgment in selection is developed by applying principles of composition when you analyze designs created by others. Designing experience confirms the meaning of art principles, studied and illustrations analyzed. Design is a natural and enjoyable outlet for creativity. You will discover the satisfaction of designing. 3 different experiments contribute to this end. Tracing designs from magazines, draping fabric on the dress form, and sketching designs on a lay figure, which is to be expanded. Each activity sharpens your power of observation in a different way. Careful, clear tracings, fashion magazine illustrations furnish material for critical analysis. Tracing is actually analysis with a pencil. And when you begin to change tracings in small ways to suit your personal taste, you will have begun to exercise your creative powers. Experimental draping transfers the feeling for the roundness of the body from mind to hand. A sculpture has this touch. Even a child model is modeling in clay begins to acquire. Draping builds up fabric folds to produce a contour immediately, and because it reveals new line formations, is a never-ending source of original inspiration. Draping also reveals the hand of a fabric, the lines it naturally falls into. Since half-size forms require little fabric, they are very useful for this purpose. Scraps of muslin or short lengths of fabric can be draped quickly to discover fabric characteristics, as well as to develop fresh new ideas. Sketching designs on tracing paper placed over lay figure has the advantage of recording mental images quickly with no equipment other than pencil and paper. Design themes like words are nebulous and liable to vanish unless jotted down quickly. Sketching is a practical and quick way to express a design so that it will clearly be understood. Even a small taste of sketching designs and criticizing results helps you analyze line quality more confidently and objectively. Practice increases facility in both expression and invention. The more quickly you develop your sense of design, the more you practice. Feel no awe at the prospect of designing, for you will not be asked to pull original creations out of thin air. Suggestions for line arrangement gives to release your uncertainty about what to do or how to do it. Do not imply that design results from a mathematical formula. Indeed, fine design is never achieved this way. But no designer works without regulations to guide her creations. Professional designers are bound by many regulations: fashion, fit, the character of the cloth, and purpose of the costume. and the cost, to name only a few. So it says you can use sketching, or you can actually drape physical fabric on to reveal the nature of the fabric. Or you can sketch designs on tracing paper placed over a lay figure, stimulating invention and increasing skill. During World War II, the federal government placed yardage restrictions on all garments. Skirts, jacket lengths, for example, were limited. Instead of inhibiting invention, designers found that regulations stimulated them to devise more economical and better ways of cutting. The student designer obviously needs help with her line arrangement. Directions to keep her from floundering helplessly or from drawing the same, often trite designs with which she is familiar. Although you may rebel at first against limitations of any sort, you will soon discover that your individual interpretation leads almost certainly to invention before you complete a design. The lay figure. Nothing kills a design more certainly than a carelessly drawn, out of proportion lay figure. And only professional fashion illustrator should attempt to design without a well-drawn one. For the following designs, use 12-inch lay figure, constructed, or draw a new one. Okay, we're going to pause right here. This says the silhouette, a taper structural lines at the waistline to soft waistline. You can have a rectangular silhouette, or if you taper, which means like tuck them in, it causes more softening of the form. That's tapered, and that's more rectangular. Shoulder and hem width, if they're the same, it might be boring, so you can vary. If everything is the same, these are the sleeves and this is the hem, everything is the same. And then if you vary the sleeves and the hem, spell it out more, that causes more variety. It's more interesting. And here we have verticals showing the axis from shoulder to hem, the vertical lines. On axes, they're tapered at the lines are tapered at the waist. That means they go in, and the lines all also harmonize with the silhouette. They're not parallel. They're not straight up and down. They're going with the silhouette form. They're parallel with the silhouette, not the ground. It says these are horizontals. But it says try to avoid dividing bodice or skirt. Okay, not sure. So thank you guys. My page is facebook.com Yosallplay, YOSALLPLAY. So I'll see you guys later. So we'll continue later and work on the exercise. Bye.